You are watching a Fact TV presentation of the Town of Swanzey Selectmen Meeting.
Motion been moved and seconded to approve the regular meeting minutes.
I'll amend my motion to the 5th, the 12th, and the non-public of April 12th.
Okay.
I'll second that.
Motion's been amended and seconded. Any further discussion?
Aye. Make a motion, we approve the consent agenda.
Second?
Motion been made and seconded to approve the consent agenda.
A quick question. The gravel ledge,
Yes.
it's past due. Does that require the town to put a lien on the property as it would if it was in the 4th year of taxes?
So the Intent-to-Excavate, is that what you're referring to?
There was one that was minimal dollars.
The
But
bill for 119.24?
yeah,
So if it is not paid, is that what you're asking? Would it go to lien? Yes, we'll go to lien.
not to go in.
If it was not paid. Correct.
Okay, and that would just carry.
Correct. It would be set.
We would have closed. Huh?
It would be set, yeah, you can't tax deed for timber or gravel.
Right. Okay, all right, thanks. I just wanted to make sure.
No, that answers your question, right? Okay. Any other statements regarding the consent agenda? Hearing none, those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Public input.
Okay. I'll make a motion that we approve Rachel Elkins for a 1-year term as an alternate on the Conservation Committee.
Second.
Commission.
A motion been made and seconded to appoint Rachel Elkins to 1 year as an alternate on the Conservation Commission. Any further discussion? Hearing none, those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Appointments. Barbara. You're on.
So is this an appropriate place for me to be, or should I move closer to there?
Richard?
Wherever you want.
On the
As long as
register?
you can hear fine, just,
Give her the microphone.
Well, okay.
geez, I guess they don't want to hear from me.
So
Be seen and not.
Definitely.
I came here because I wanted to share some of my thoughts about shoreline protection. And since I know you were considering getting an urban exemption from shoreline protection for the homestead property, I was curious and just wanted to have an understanding of where you were coming from with that decision. So I have a couple handouts that I had prepared, and I wanted to just start with one that starts here with the New Hampshire Non-Point Source Management Program plan. That's something that the state has. This one is dated 2020 to 24. And just a few comments that I pulled from that plan, just about non-point source pollution is responsible for about 90% of pollution in our surface water in the state. So it's a significant issue. We also have warmer temperatures, which we all know that are occurring, especially in winter and early spring. So we're getting higher, faster snow melt. We're getting greater volumes of runoff and peak flows compared to what we've had in the past. Southern New Hampshire extreme precipitation events are expected to double by 2050. So these storm events that are really causing flooding, we're expecting to get more of them. Things that we didn't used to see, we're going to be seeing more of it. And we can, more likely we will have storm events of 4 inches or more in a 48-hour period. 50% of road salt, or greater than 50% of road salt, is attributed to private roads and parking lots. So it's not just highways, but 50% is private. There's also the growing concern for PFAS, which I'm sure you're familiar with, that term, found in stormwater runoff. Trees and shrubs are considered the optimum vegetation types to promote filtration of pollutants. And protecting surface water quality can be done by controlling soil erosion, managing, treating, and recharging stormwater runoff from development sites. Then NOAA has a few comments also about the impact of stormwater and impervious surface. So if you have impervious surface reduces the amount of infiltration of stormwater, which would treat any kind of pollutants. So if you have impervious surface, you also have a greater amount of runoff going into the streams before it gets treated. So you have more sediment, more pollution, which all can degrade water quality. Sensitive streams can be impacted by as little as 5 to 10% of impervious surface on a lot. So, but once you go up to greater than 20 to 25%, you have a greater impairment. Riparian buffers can be an important component for stream stability, pollutant removal, and stream health maintenance. So those are just some general considerations about stormwater runoff and the effect of impervious surface. So what I have below here is just some real data from our river that was collected over last year, and it has to do with specific conductance. And that chart, specific conductance measures the amount of ions that are circulating in water. So
The amount of what?
ions. Okay, so if you have you dump something in the water, it becomes, it ionizes, and that's how you measure whether it's clean or not. Distilled water, deionized water is clean water, you take all that out. So if you kind of look, this shows each month. And what's important is if you can look under May and you see Stone Arch Bridge Keene, and you see that the column goes up to just a little bit above 50, and the measurement is microsiemens. Then you go up to that next line in between the Stone Arch Bridge and the Keene Wastewater Treatment Plant, and it goes up to 100. That site is Route 101, Martel Court. So it's basically, we're taking a measurement of the ions above Keene and below Keene. And what this tells you is it goes from like 50 to 100. And 100 to 200 is considered moderate to high impact. And what that is giving us is an idea of what happens when you have more development and more impervious surface, more runoff. You end up with more in the water. So here we measure at the Thompson Covered Bridge, and then we don't measure again until Winchester. But this will show you a developed area and the impact. If you go into June, you see the same thing. Route 101 Keene, it's above that 100 line. The line before it is just a little bit above 52. So once again, before Keene and after Keene, you have a significant increase in the amount of conductance attributed to development and runoff. So taking a look at the mill, I have these, I'm sure you're familiar with this site. This is kind of dark, but you can see here is Main Street, Covered Bridge, and then here is Swanzey Street, and then down here is Winchester Street. But this is the mill property here. And there's all buildings and pavement, and then there's this tiny strip right here that's undeveloped. And then right along here you have a row of trees. I'm not exactly sure if that's on their land or if that's the abutters' land. So this is a copy of a plan that was drawn up in December of 2020 that kind of shows some of the where the river is and the different areas for shoreline protection. Shoreline protection is divided into a 50-foot buffer where no development can happen, and then 150, which is a woodland buffer where you have the Shoreline Protection Act specifies the percent of impervious surface, and then you have the 250, which is the full impact for shoreline. So if you can see here, this dark line is the river, and that's what they call, as the ordinary high water mark, where you start to measure. This line right here is the 50-foot buffer. So you can see that all of this is pavement, building. There's most of this 50-foot buffer is currently untouched and intact. But everything else beyond that is developed with impervious surface. The 250-foot buffer, so the extent of the shoreline protection is here. So this amount of the property is within shoreline protection. This amount is not. So this whole area, the newer part where the field house is, and the little building where they used to sell the wool, and there's offices there now, that's not within the shoreline protection. But this is, just this area here. So the second page gives you some of the provisions of Shoreline Protection Act. And if you look under trees, vegetation removal, and then you see that waterfront buffer area, within 50 feet of the reference line, except for a 6-foot path to the water, which people can put in, shrubs may be trimmed and pruned to a minimum height of 3 feet. And then basically it needs to be intact, except that if you maintain a certain percentage of trees and shrubs, there's a grid system that you must maintain, and you can't remove beyond that amount. So that's the area that we're talking about right now that is currently undeveloped. There's a whole lot of area here that's impervious surface. A lot of it isn't even in the shoreline protection. So I'm not clear on exactly why you would want to develop this 50-foot buffer, since it's got trees and shrubs which are known to inhibit pollution, to help with infiltration. It's also provides some cooling for the water. It also provides habitat for small mammals. You know, I moved here in 1981, and I started working with the river in around 1990. Actually before that, but 1990 is where I became much more involved. So when I was doing gathering information in order to place the river into the Rivers Management Protection Program, I heard stories about the river turning colors based on whatever color the dye was being used at the mill. And I don't think any of us here had ever seen that, you know, because by 1970s, you had the Clean Water Act. And so things started getting cleaned up. So we no longer had that pollution occurring. We started getting our wastewater treatment plants, which we have, which helped to remove waste that was actually, there was actual septage going right into the river prior to that. So the river's come a long way. And on this particular parcel, we have a 50-foot buffer that's intact. We have 90% of that rest of the lot that is impervious surface. So why would we want to impact a river that has come along and improved over the years? Why would we want to take away from a buffer that's actually providing some protection? On the back of this sheet, the first sheet I gave you, is the RSA, and it talks about non-conforming structures. So that's what this is. This is an existing non-conforming structure. And there are provisions in the RSA for that. They may be repaired, replaced in kind, reconstructed in place, altered, or expanded. However, no expansion or relocation of the existing footprint within the waterfront buffer. So that's the only restriction in terms of any kind of changes that you want to make on that property. You just can't move anything closer to the high water mark. And also, it says any enclosure, there's no, doesn't allow for enclosure or conversion of living space of any deck or open porch, which there's, the only open area would be right next to the Thompson Covered Bridge. There's that little driveway, and then that little, I don't know if it's a, yeah, loading dock of sort, you know. But so that wouldn't be permissible to be closed in, you know, for housing purposes. However, when Sarah and I met with the owner and Sherry Domino from Concom met with the owner, he had expressed, I asked him, you know, what's inhibiting you from, you know, doing what you want to do? And his comment was, well, you know, if you put a restaurant in, people might want to have a dock or, you know, be able to see the water. Well, this says, if you look at the provision number 5, Roman numeral 5, a deck or open porch extending a maximum of 12 feet towards the reference line may be added to non-conforming structures. So he could have an extension into that 50-foot buffer, and that's provided for a deck or, you know, an open porch, if that was his concern. But in terms of the rest of the lot, there, I don't see how this could impact his being responsibly renovating that property for housing or for commercial use. So I'm kind of curious as your understanding of why you would want to go ahead and go through with trying to obtain an urban exemption on this property.
Basically, as you mentioned, Chamber feels that's an important component of developing that site, and that's obviously an important significant structure in this area. The board wants to be receptive to supporting the redevelopment of that property and trying to get it to its highest and best use. So even though it is still somewhat, I'll say, unclear exactly what they're planning, I think where it's just this, it's only one section of the river. We looked at adding, we discussed adding a couple different additional properties into the park property and decided to just focus on this one. So felt that the potential impact, again, maybe whatever they do doesn't even end up kind of encroaching into that area, but it's a way for the town to show support for that property and to try to do, you know, we have a few tools that we can use to try to spur development. And so I think the board felt it was important to try to be collaborative and try to work with that owner to try to get that property to its best use.
So yes, getting that property to its best use, and that best use does include protecting the river that it abuts, doesn't it? I mean, why would you want, I mean, we have, the downside is we have no provisions in our regulations, our Swanzey regulations, to prevent that buffer from being developed. This is our only, you know, Swanzey defers to shoreline protection. And so if you take that away, then he can go ahead and do whatever he wants in that buffer zone, which is a significant protection for the river, for the water quality of that river. And that would just be going backwards. I mean, so you've got river upstream, river downstream, and then you got a place where you have potential runoff from salt, you have other pollutants that come from the pavement, from cars, from just general uses, PFAs, and there's that little buffer that's intact. And so he can still put in his deck. There's nothing in here that says he can't develop. He's got 90% of that property already, it developed within a footprint, and you can still go ahead and change that. You can still do the expansions, you can still do the renovations within the parameters of the Shoreline Protection Bill. So it's not really inhibiting him from doing whatever he wants, but what you're basically saying is you would just as soon give somebody free rein to do whatever they choose, but the rest of the town, you still expect them to abide by our rules and regulations to protect water quality, drinking water, or whatever aspects of the town that you want to protect, livability of the town. I mean, why would you single out for one person to throw away the one provision that protects the river that he sees as an attribute that he says people would want, access to? And he can't have access. It's given in here. He can't have access. He can't have a deck. He can't, he can do the renovations he needs within that footprint, which is already, there's not much left. It's already developed. And so it's basically a strong protection and our only protection. So I would ask the board to reconsider, and perhaps I hear what you have to say, but I don't hear what you have to say, unless.
I agree with Michael. The mill has been just an impending Damocles sword, for lack of a better analogy, that without someone who is capable of renovating the mill, there was a very real possibility that we would, as a town, end up being responsible for it, which would cost, just to do what the charrette recommended, which was opening up the pathway, that was over $1 million,
Right.
just to do that. And so it would be at least that amount to tear that mill down. So my feeling was, as Michael said, that we should provide a true developer, which Chinburg is a true
Right.
developer.
Yes, yes.
I had the opportunity years ago not knowing I was in one of their renovations, to be in one of their renovations, which they did right on the bank. Actually, they had parking. Yeah, they had parking behind the building that went right up to the river's edge. And this particular building had a beautiful view over that parking lot to the river. So, as I said, I didn't know it was a Chinburg property at the time, but they did do a nice job. So I was thrilled when we learned that they had purchased the mill, because they are the first ones that have owned it in my time here that legitimately have the ability to pull off a renovation that would be beneficial not only to us as a town, but to the broader community. So that was my rationale for supporting the urban exemption. And I know it opens up a potential can of worms, because we don't know what it is that they want to do. I'm assuming and maybe Michael will correct me if I'm wrong, it's still, whatever their plans are, they still need to go through site plan review. And even if they have that exemption, it doesn't mean that the planning board is going to have to agree with it. But the flip side is that we've shown them that as a board, that we support their efforts to renovate the mill. And that's my position. I don't anticipate that they're going to do anything that's going to intentionally compromise the water quality. It's just not their nature. If they were doing that, they wouldn't be welcomed as they are in communities around the state to renovate these mills that otherwise are in disrepair. So anyway, that's my position, and I'm going to stay with it, and I would follow it through the planning board process. I could be outvoted by my colleagues, but
But the
which may
planning
happen.
board has no ability to, say, have control over that 50-foot buffer. They have no ability to say, you cannot build in that, because we don't have any provision that says that.
Well, there's already runoff.
There's runoff, but there's a 50-foot buffer that
There are
treats
ways,
that
right,
runoff.
but there are ways through engineering
Yes, there are.
to
Yes,
take
there
that
are.
runoff and redirect it, maybe
Yes.
to the south, to the other wooded area that you spoke of, whether or not it's the abutter's property or that property.
Yes, there is, but there's nothing to,
Planning board could require it.
but they can't prevent him from putting something in that 50-foot buffer, which is a natural.
Which is what he's asking for, is to be able to do that,
Right.
and then redirect it maybe somewhere else. Maybe engineer something that would be better in the long run than what it is now.
But not if he, right now, that 50-foot buffer is intact. And-
Is it
Yeah.
working as good as what he might engineer? Maybe he's
Yes,
gonna
it
make
is.
something better.
Well, I mean,
We don't know.
information and, research indicates that distance in ground and shrubs and trees act to help infiltration and to filter. So to have the water go in and also be treated before it hits the river. So anything else you do, I mean, right now, you need to do something to take what's already running off and maybe redirect it elsewhere to lessen that impact.
I don't know if you can't work in that area. Can you? You have to leave it alone.
You have to, right, you leave it alone, but I'm talking about all the impervious surface, the parking lots, the buildings, there's infiltration trenches you can build, you can place around the building to take some of that runoff in place rather than it running directly into the river. You've got slopes of roofs that make a difference, but the
I know
point,
there's a driveway that comes on the back of the parking lot. and
both
comes right
sides,
down,
actually,
right.
yeah,
So
yeah.
maybe that would be better in the long run. And then as far as the conductance, last year, we had the drought in the beginning, obviously. I don't know how far back these charts go, but looks like early in the year, there wasn't much runoff. So
Yeah.
that there wasn't much conductance. You have
This-
February, May, June, and then it peaks. July and August, September was when the drought ended.
Right, it's less water flow.
We got a lot more water
Actually,
runoff.
September was when we had a little bit more water, and so what happened is, you see the numbers go down in September, and that's because you have dilution.
Right, well, there's dilution, but before that, when we have the heavy rains, it's washing the roads and everything else. There's
And-
runoff.
Right, that increases
So that
runoff.
increases, and
That
then you
in-
have dilution because the water level comes up and there's dilution. The other thing is the Keene wastewater treatment plant's kind of right in there, and then you see it peak after that. They have a copper problem that they know of, that they're trying to do something with. And I can't believe that copper isn't an excellent conductor in the water,
So
and maybe that's an issue.
that wastewater treatment plant is in the middle, but that particular site is upstream of the wastewater treatment plant.
Okay.
Okay, so, again, if you just want to take May as an example, you're going from 50 pre-Keene up to 100. And then after that is the site upstream of the wastewater treatment plant. The next two sites that are lower are actually the South Branch. All right?
Okay.
So you've got the flow of the South Branch, and then you have the crescent-covered bridge. So that's why it drops that little bit, because you're taking the South Branch, which doesn't have any of the river, but then you're adding that to the river. but you still end up with, at the Crescent, you know, that elevated reading, and it kind of continues as you go downstream. But the purpose of this is to show that regardless of what's happening in terms of the amount of runoff, pre and post Keene, pre and post development, you have a lower value before you get into a developed area. The value goes up after. So
Right.
there's more runoff and there's more stuff coming into the river.
And I think everybody recognizes that.
Right.
So
So,
the other option is to not develop anything.
no,
And-
the other option is to shoreline protection. Actually, if you have over 30% of impervious surface, you need to employ engineering methods
Right.
to handle the treatment.
I
In
guess
this-
my point
in
is
this-
from here all the way up to Keene, to the wastewater treatment plant, is basically undeveloped, except for the Crescent Bridge. There's the ultimate shoreline protection,
Right, right,
hundreds of yards wide.
Right.
All the way up. And yet
But-
it's high.
well, it's
So-
maintaining, if you see, it's kind of maintaining. It doesn't, but the significant increase is right after the development, and then it maintains,
Right, which we understand.
yeah.
So
So,
I think we can engineer something better. I'm not going to speak for the developer, but I think right now there is runoff, and that if he can get in there and do something with those two roads that come down to the river, that maybe something could be better.
but if you give him, there is no weight.
Right, but he
To-
can't do anything right now. He can't work in there.
Yes, he can, that's what I'm trying to say.
He can put a deck, but what I'm saying is he cannot go in and actually do anything engineering-wise in that area.
Not
to
in the
try and improve
50-foot
it.
buffer, because you can't improve on a natural buffer. That's the premise
I
is.
respectfully disagree because I think the engineers can. The
Well-
wastewater treatment plant is engineered to do better than all the septic systems dumping in,
Yeah, because septic systems fail,
right?
that's why.
Yeah, and plants
So,
fail
and
if you don't
that's-
engineer
septic-
them.
Septic systems are engineered.
Yeah.
It's still an engineering solution. So it's not necessarily, it's a failure of an engineering solution. But the point being is that the Shoreline Protection Act does not inhibit him from renovating that property. It just keeps him from developing a 50-foot buffer that's protecting the river. It does not prevent him from doing whatever else he wants to do up there, because it's basically, you know, a non-conforming structure. So he can still do whatever within that area. It's just protecting that 50 feet. And why wouldn't you want to protect that resource? He can still develop the land. And you think he can't? Properly?
I don't think he can.
You don't think he can?
No, I think you just pointed out that he can put a deck on it,
Right.
but he can't really do anything else.
But,
He can cut a shrub down to 3 feet or something, right? But
right.
what else can he do?
But he's got, we're talking about the 90% of that parcel that he owns that can still be redeveloped and changed into whatever he wants. And we're just asking to leave that buffer intact, because that's the critical piece in terms of river protection, surface water protection. And right now, this bill, this act, that RSA allows him to still renovate the property, to put in there whatever he wants, but just leave that buffer. That's all it does, is ask him to leave that buffer, which is, again, a critical piece. And so we throw that out the window?
I just think he's trying to make it better. There's already runoff.
There's already runoff, and
the
he
storms are
can
gonna
make
get
it better.
worse, so there's gonna be more runoff.
He can make it better by staying within that beyond that, between that 50 and 200 or beyond area to treat that stormwater. But leave that 50-foot buffer, which is, literature will tell you, is critical for habitat and for water quality.
Michael, did he give an explanation of why, what it was needed for? Or was it a general?
The general request, he hasn't finalized his plans for the property, he talked about potentially doing patios or barbecue areas, recreational areas, that sort of thing. I don't think he's planning on constructing structures or parking or driveways. I think it's more kind of ancillary items. That's what I understood from our session, it was like a year ago that we first talked about it.
Did he say anything about trying to close off the building so the river didn't literally run through it? Is that part of what he's trying to accomplish?
Honestly, we talked to him pretty early, he hadn't even done, I don't even know if he was aware of that at that point. He was going to do like a geometric review of the entire building, so I don't even know if he was aware of that, but I don't remember that coming up with the meeting.
I was just curious.
I know he talked about tearing down a wooden structure, and it's not clear to me which part of that, it's somewhere in the middle of the complex, I
It's
think.
that part that was recommended at the charrette to be torn down.
Yeah.
That alone, and the quotes that we had been told were about $1 million. That's the one I was referring to pull that down, seal off the ends, or whatever he's going to, I don't know what he's going to do, but the plan was to seal off the ends, pull out the middle, and create a vista walkway down to the water. That was from the charrette
I
back
thought
in 2012.
the walkway was going to be going through, like parallel with Swanzey Street kind of thing, like Winchester Street.
Yep, there was that,
Yeah.
but this was a way to come from the parking area that goes to the field house to walk down to the river.
And you could still do that. You could still do that. You can have a 6-foot path going within that
Well, it'd be
50-foot
more
buffer
than
down
It'd
to
be
the
more than
water.
6 feet.
Yeah, it'd be more than 6, it's.
No, 6 feet wide.
Right, that's what
Yeah.
it's saying.
Yeah.
I don't
And the
know.
other thing you have to remember is you know, that's also in floodplain. If,
Yeah, that is, it's why it runs through the building.
excuse me?
That's why the river, when it overflows, runs through the building.
Through the building, yeah, well, okay, so, yeah, so, you know, you have to be careful what you put in there, and we do have some floodplain regulations, but you have to go to the ZBA, which we know may or may not enforce the regulation, or may allow the exceptions, so,
Appreciate your passion.
pardon?
Appreciate your passion and your knowledge. I'd like to know more about this chart, because it gets confusing going back and forth between the two covered bridges and the south branch.
But I think we're a little late for our next agenda.
Sorry.
All right. Pardon?
I said 10 minutes ago.
Okay, well, just so you know, after the Crescent Bridge, the next site is the Thompson River Bridge. So on
What I
that
meant was
chart.
going back and forth through here. One month it's Thompson, then it goes Crescent, then Thompson. So
But the
that-
sites, all of the sites are on there, it's just that when you try to fit a chart onto this amount of space, it can't fit all the words in.
Mm-hmm.
So each one, if you,
Sorry, Ken.
Do we need
Yep.
to get to the public hearing?
yep. Well, so,
I can catch up with you.
okay, but this is the sequence, Stone Arch, King, upstream of the King Lost Crescent, and then right in between, you'll see there's a line, and that's where Thompson Covered Bridge is, and then
Okay.
Route 119 and Hinsdale, then it starts again in Washington, goes up to
Okay.
Richmond, so.
Thank you, Barbara.
Thank you.
Barbara,
Is that mine or yours?
uh,
No, that's yours.
we're now 12 minutes into the public hearing, we're supposed to start at 6 o'clock. And the public hearing is in accordance with Article 14, passed at the 2004 annual town meeting, and that's maybe 14A. It has to do with two lots,
Yes, sir.
two lots owned by the town One is map 16, lot 13, and the second is map 16, lot 19. And the public hearings are going to be held on April 19th at 6 p.m., which is now 6:13, and May 3rd. And we do have input from the planning board.
Yes, both the planning board and conservation commission.
Conservation Commission. So we'll open the public hearing. Is there anyone who wishes to speak? Not seeing anybody wishing to speak. Is there anybody on the board that wishes to speak? Not hearing.
I think we should take, in the I think it was the Conservation Commission minutes, there was some question with regard to the land on the north side. There was that, but somebody mentioned it was all wetlands, but on the south side, asking, the one that used to be Tire Warehouse, asking if anybody had walked the land and if there was any understanding of what the composition of the land was. I think we should know a little bit more information on that. I think it's pretty clear. On the north side, it's almost all wet. There's just one path that goes through that might have been, when it was an old gravel pit, maybe that was sort of driveway was put in, but the rest of it's wet, so.
Sherry Domina and I think Rachel Elkins, they walked the property that day and did note there were some wet spots, but there are some decent dry spots as well. So it's a mix. There's definitely some wet areas, but it does seem like it has some. That one definitely has more potential for revenue and development, I think, than the other lot.
Okay.
Okay. What is your pleasure? Do you want to pursue walking it, or do you?
No, I think they did it. So
They did.
I missed that in the minutes. So.
Okay.
Maybe it didn't. Is
I've
that
had line
your
once.
recollection
I
too,
don't-
Beverly? I thought they mentioned that they had walked it that day.
They had talked about doing it, but I don't know if anyone did.
Yeah,
Come on up. Welcome. Welcome. Just need to introduce yourself, and then we're happy to hear from you.
Marie Koski, and there's a lot on Foxborough.
I'm
Marie
sorry, ma'am?
Koski?
Yeah.
Marie Koski?
Can you spell
Koski?
the last name for me?
KOSKI.
Thank you.
No E, I would have lost that
No,
fast.
easier.
I just have a question. I've been on the hill since late '79. And when we first moved there, and I don't know references, but you start up the hill, the left side, which I guess would be more the
South, yeah.
side. Was pretty much the way the other side of the road is. That got filled in when this tire warehouse and or there was talking about a gas station convenience store at one point. That land was filled in, I think, in preparation or something to try to do that. And then I don't know why it never went through. So that side of the road did at one point look like the other side, which is definitely wetlands. And if you go down the road just a little piece, you can see all the wetlands out behind it. So I'm just wondering why you're even thinking of putting something in there when it clearly is wet.
we're not thinking of putting anything in either of the parcels. The purpose of the public hearing is to make the public aware that we're considering putting those properties out for sale because the town owns them.
With the expectation that somebody's going to buy that and put something on there.
There is no expectation other than it's land that we can't justify owning. The Marcy Hill Road is already wider than it should be. We have adequate rights of way with regard to the road. We have to justify holding on to land, and we've just determined that we bring it to the public. We're looking for input on this to help us form a decision, but it's not with the expectation that someone would develop it or not.
These days, I don't think anybody's gonna buy that property, just like hold on to it, like, town doesn't wanna just hold on to it, so I can't see that somebody else is gonna pay however much.
Well, we just sold
Have
a,
some kind of expectation.
we just sold a piece of property in Westmoreland for 90-some-odd thousand that
Didn't have.
It's landlocked.
it's landlocked, they're not doing anything with it. So, we don't know what someone would do, obviously.
There might be in a butter
Could be,
that
yeah.
might need the frontage or something.
Okay, my concern is that they would keep filling in the wetlands.
They'd have a little bit of a problem today.
Yeah, so anyone that purchased it, if they did want to develop it, if it was for, commercial, have to go through site plan review, and so if you're in a butter, you'd be getting notices, or there'd be notices.
What used to be ground up now is whatever it is, like the shed thing. That was filled in, because that area down there, like I said, was all wetland. That was filled in, and then, ground up was allowed to build there.
But they didn't fill anything in, though. They utilized what was already there.
I think it used to be a little bit more wetlands than what it is. I mean, you can clearly see where, if you come down the hill, you can clearly see the back edge where,
It does drop off.
yeah. So, that's just my concern.
No, appreciate it.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Any additional, yes, Barbara?
Barbara Snow. So I was on the Concom when all of that was happening, with that being filled in. And I'm trying to remember all the details, but that was going to be developed, and it did get filled in, and it was stopped because it was illegally filling in wetlands. So I guess, and there was talk of making that a public access point, if the town had it. Planting maybe blueberries because it was a very sandy soil. And I guess it just got left, undeveloped, and no one had any interest. But there was a development that was planned for that and then got shut down because it was wet. And so if you were to sell that property, I wouldn't be surprised, and you said you just sell it, you don't have any restrictions on what happens, and you just look at the existing use of the land and allow whatever's allowed on what's there. So, I don't know if there's any proviso that would say this was filled land, this was wetland, should restoration happen? Should you allow somebody to now develop it when somebody was not allowed to develop it because it was illegally filled? It's kind of a sticky situation, I would think. But now, how many years later, somebody can buy it and develop it? Whereas the original person who built it
No,
can't?
no, they would have to go through all of the hoops.
Yeah, they would go through the hoops, but what I'm saying is now, areas that used to be wet now look dry. Do you see what I'm saying? Because it was illegally filled, and it never was restored. And so what looks like buildable spots, as Sherry reported, there's some dry areas and some wet, right?
That's what I understood her to say,
Right,
yeah, not to
right.
speak for her, but.
Because it's been filled, so it's changed. It's a changed property. It's not what it was before. So it's just kind of interesting because the person who originally wanted, was it Judy?
Yeah, I think so.
Judy.
Because I think
Now
I
it's
was
coming
on-
back to me,
I
the
was on
Judy
the
property.
planning board when that was coming
Yeah,
back.
yeah. So, so now, how many years later, this is what happens, the property gets illegally filled, it becomes theoretically dry, and somebody else will come and develop it.
Who was first, tire warehouse or duty? Because I remember the tire
I saw
warehouse.
Tire Warehouse. I
That got
didn't see
beaten
Duty.
back in a heartbeat,
Yeah,
huh?
Duty wanted to build the convenience.
That must have been
Right.
before. Tire
Gas
Warehouse
station.
was who donated to the town.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, then I'm not familiar with Tire Warehouse. I'm more familiar with Duty.
Yeah, so it's just, it's an interesting situation to be in. Over time, illegal activity can create a situation later that suddenly is allowable. If it's now dry because the wetlands were destroyed. But I know that at the time, there was talk about making that a public park or a public access point for, just,
I don't remember all the details of
Yeah.
that,
yeah.
but I do remember Duty.
Judy, I know, it's hard to remember that. I may forget that, but anyway.
Okay,
Thanks, Barbara.
thanks, Barbara. Any other comments? All right, shall we close off?
So we'll close this one, and then we'll do it again in 2 weeks, so
Yeah.
continue the discussion.
So we can go home.
Yes, ma'am, we would expect nothing less.
Thanks, Barbara.
Thanks, Barbara. Okay. Contract awards.
Oh, we want to get to our other appointment there.
Yes.
Heather's been dutifully waiting
Oh,
there.
I'm sorry.
Maybe they should.
Pretty much just tomorrow off anyway, but
Yeah.
Did she
I don't know, it's not, I don't see it in here. You brought payroll, yeah, I'll have to bring it to your house tomorrow, I guess. I don't see it in here, so. There's stuff to sign, but I don't see any money, unfortunately. She did her part, so I don't know.
All right,
I didn't do my
whatever.
part again.
Okay, you're on.
So I'm here tonight to ask for grant money to start the preservation of some of our vital records. I guess it wasn't grant money, the money you had talked about.
Oh.
invest in it?
Yeah.
No.
So CoFile is a company that does municipalities and vital records. They came into our office and assessed what we had in our vault. This is a rough estimate that they gave for everything in there that needs kind of, over the years, immediate attention. The last time we did anything with this was 2010. So I was looking to do 4 of these books, preserve 4 of these books this year. That's kind of my hopes.
How does the process work? Are they doing a spray? I couldn't quite understand.
They are, yep. So they will rebind books that need rebinding, and then they spray both sides of the paper with a magnesium oxide spray, and it's good. It keeps the paper good for like another 100 years. So some of the books in the vault have been sprayed that have been done already. There's 2 that are encapsulated, so they put like a plastic sheathing over paper that is damaged or falling apart. That takes up kind of double the room in the vault. 1 book would then be made into 2 because of the thickness of it. The books that I'm looking at doing, which I don't know if I highlighted them on the papers you have, are the first 2, the record book, invoices and taxes. And then further down, there's deaths, version 2, and underneath it, marriages, births, and deaths. So if we did those 4, it would close out kind of that series from the 17 and 1800s of the vital records part. Previous town clerks had started.
So do you recommend the microfilm or the optional imaging? Is that digital?
It is digital.
Okay.
So I
So,
did
I mean-
ask her about that, and she said most municipalities do also
Digital.
ask for that file. She's unclear whether we have digital imaging for the ones that have already been done. So they were really done by Browns River, which has since gone out of business, and Co-File bought them. So it would be the same company.
I'd be in favor of digital over microfilm, but that's just me.
Yeah,
Is that what you're recommending?
it is what I'm recommending. Yes.
So it would be both processes?
Yes. I think the one that we would, I mean, if anything of these columns, that the total and the grand total price would be the optional imaging. Which,
I missed that.
I don't really actually know how they, so the microfilm would be digital copies, files, digital files. And then the optional imaging, I'm not quite sure. And I apologize for that, what that would be, because we didn't discuss any other type of records that we would keep.
So it could potentially be the preservation and the optional imaging
Right, so if we,
for 47.4.
yes. It also doesn't include, at the bottom, it says estimated shipping per volume, $35. So if we did 4 of them, that would add $140 to the cost that I'm asking for. It also does not include any additional pages that might be in the record. So some of them have paper clipped to them additional pieces of paper. So when she scanned the book, she literally counted the pages and not all of the paper clipped pieces, which would also need to be preserved and put into the book. So that,
Not a
that
cheap
cost.
process, is it?
It is not a cheap process at all. And like everything, the cost has gone up since we did them in 2010. But if we don't start doing something, these numbers are just gonna increase.
Yep.
We have 3 books, they're record of tax books that the bindings have mold on them. So we're gonna need to start somewhere. And I feel like completing the vinyl or the vital records series is really the place to start.
Well, I appreciate you taking the initiative.
You're welcome.
So you want consensus, Mike, or?
So we'd be looking to utilize those $4,000 in the document preservation, restoration, capital reserve fund. So I'd be looking for a motion for that.
How much did you say, sorry? How much?
4,000.
4,000?
Yeah.
From that reserve.
Yeah, so you'll have to
And then we'll have a nice
repeat it.
meeting with the capital improvement committee, because this is going to be a capital expense, it looks like. So it's the document preservation and restoration capital reserve fund.
Yeah, okay.
Okay, that's-
So-
Bill will get that one.
So moved.
Second.
Motion made and seconded. Those in favor, or additional comments? Those in favor?
Aye,
Aye.
Good job.
thank you.
Thank you very
How
much,
how
gentlemen.
many, how many more albums are we looking at?
Everything on this list, and that doesn't include records kind of from the 1950s and 60s forward. Those books are in really great shape now. I mean, eventually they're going to need to be coated in the magnesium oxide spray, but it was not included in this initial cost. I mean, there's a lot of records in there between taxes and selectmen minutes and vital records. Another thing that I found recently that was not included in this, which I feel is very important, is service records for honorable discharge, gentlemen, men, and women from years and years ago. And that's really, that's probably the last file that there is documentation on that. So those were loosely in a box that I found in there. So I was going to take some pictures and send them to the woman that I was working with to get an idea of what those would need to be put into a book. But I feel like that's a pretty important part of our history.
Yeah,
Sure.
appreciate you taking the initiative.
Thank you.
Good job. We've been talking about this for a long time and making progress, so that's good. Thank you.
Have a good night.
You too.
All right, consideration of new business. Recycling center improvements.
So the on this a couple weeks ago, I bid, we ended up getting one from TCD Construction of Peterborough, which is a company that's currently doing the Richardson Park bathhouse project. And we had a little confusion because we wanted Amer Electric to be the preferred contractor for electrical and wiring. And so they submitted a separate proposal, so we needed to kind of flush out what was in, make sure we weren't kind of double paying for stuff that was in both proposals. So that's been incorporated. The Amer and the TCD comes to a total cost of $963,265. Construction to be expected later in the summer, August, September. And we're recommending about a 10%, $90,000 contingency. So we came up a little bit short on the available funds, but we have a couple different options that I've outlined. So one would be to tap some of the Invest-in-H funds that the town was awarded under the Affordable Housing Per Unit grant. So we were awarded $840,000 so far. Could understand if you don't want to tap that. Hopefully we wouldn't need these funds mainly for contingency, but we could utilize $95,000 from that. The other option is when we approved the Richardson Park funding, we did have some other recreational funds that we kind of held back and used some of the American Rescue Plan Act funds. If we wanted to, I'll say, kind of clean out the couch cushions, use all the other recreational funds for the rec project, we could then use some more of the American Rescue Plan Act funds versus the Invest-in-H funds. The downside is then, the next recreational project we want to get going, we're really starting from scratch versus having a little bit of seed and design money. So I think either one is acceptable. Again, hopefully we'll come in, at the contract amounts. We won't really need the contingencies anyway, but I think it's good to have them approved on the front end.
What was the purpose of Amer being a favored?
Well, basically, they're the ones that we use to maintain them, and we've had some issues with other local or other recent projects where someone else install it and they go out of business, then Amer's working to fix it, basically. So we just rather work with them from the beginning. Present location.
Yep.
I'd be in favor of option one.
Me
You
too.
see Invest-in-H, and that's what it's for infrastructure, and these new people are gonna be using the recycle center, so they better be.
I'll make that motion.
Second?
Motion's been made and seconded for option one.
I don't have that, so.
Well, you did get a copy of
I didn't
that?
get that contract.
Here, I'll give you that one. She's got it.
Oh, now I got it, okay.
Sorry.
So
Option
we're doing
one.
Option one?
Yep.
Further discussion, hearing none, all in favor?
All right,
Aye.
is it done yet? Is it built yet?
Yeah.
Meeting schedule.
I know you are meeting next week, but I figured to give Jen a little extra time for the notices. I figured I'd put this on now just for kind of planning purposes. So usually we try to do every other, now that we're getting the summer schedule. So we have our second public hearing of the first one that we had here tonight on May 3rd. And a couple of possible suggested non-meeting weeks. I don't know if we want to try to stick with the every other. Planning to be at the Primex conference on May 17th, so we could stick Julius with one so he doesn't get rusty if you want. Or we could have 2 weeks off and then meet again on the 24th, so it would be the 3rd and the 24th in May. Or like I said, you want to go every other, we could do the 3rd and the 17th.
Or we could just do the 10th.
You gotta do the 3rd, so you can do the 3rd and the 10th. So we have the other public hearing on the 3rd.
No, what do you mean on the 10th?
No, we need the third.
Yeah.
Let's just say,
Yeah.
that's all they say.
I didn't bring up the 3rd, I brought up the 10th.
He's saying the 3rd and the 10th, not meet 17th
But
or 31st, I believe.
I think we ought to stick with the schedule and an agreement if we want to cancel the 10th, but do the 3rd, the 17th, the 24th, and then not the
on the 17th, you're confusing me, Ken. Meeting or not meeting?
Oh, I'm confusing everyone, but
Not me.
I know what I'm saying, and no one else does. So therefore,
So we're skipping the 10th and the 24th.
Nope. 31st,
31st and the,
10th.
oh, and the 10th, not the 17th.
Oh,
I'm with you, Ken.
thank you.
what happened to the every other?
Well, it's not working out, is it?
I guess it's not.
So we're gonna meet the 3rd, the 17th, and the 24th.
Yeah, okay.
The third, the
17th,
17th.
24th, okay, got it.
Yes.
Gotcha.
Or more is needed.
Or as we always have that option.
Just the stuff that has.
Third. Okay, so we're meeting back to back. Okay. All right. Got it. But we are meeting next week. Right. We are meeting next week.
Yes,
3rd,
yes,
Oh.
community power,
yeah,
Community
community power.
next week.
Upstairs, right?
Yeah.
Meeting will be
We're gonna have
upstairs.
hundreds of people.
Thousands. Everybody got their postcards.
There's no other public business, we're gonna go into a non-public, is that
Yeah,
Got anything for us, Jim?
last chance, Jim?
You just came by to hit us with the cane?
Good to see you.
Last name, I know him. That's it. Remember.
We'll give our best to Marcy, because we gotta go into non-public. Make a motion, we go into non-public?
Second?
motion made and second, to go to non-public.
Holy,
Aye.
Me.
Jarzynski.
This meeting was recorded by Falls Area Community Television, located at 1 Hospital Court, Bellows Falls, Vermont. If you would like a copy of the meeting, our phone number is 802-463-1613, or email us at fact810@gmail.com. Falls Area Community TV, keeping government honest.